Okay, welcome to the final installment of my three-part series on my Great Enemies Tour, the Four Frenetic Days in the DPRK and Russian Empire, from July 11 through July 15.
My father taught me many things here. He taught me in this room. He taught me, keep your friends close, but your enemies closer.
And so ultimately, that is why I went. That's why I call it the Great Enemies Tour. And I think what Michael Corleone was conveying there, or at least his father conveying to him, is knowledge. It's important to know and understand who your perceived enemies are. As it may turn out, and it's more important to know your enemies than your friends, is essentially, I think, what Don Corleone was conveying. And so that's why I went to the DPRK as well as Russia this time, since I happen to be in close proximity. And you learn a lot. And you learn a lot about the purported enemies, and that a lot of this is tilting at windmills, in my opinion. A lot of the press about what's going on in the DPRK and what their intentions are, as well as in Russia, is a lot to do about nothing. Not that I shouldn't say that. That's probably too extreme. There is concern, obviously, and we should be concerned, but the level of rhetoric and fear is over the top. And I'll leave it at that. Let you decide based upon what you see in my videos. And by the way, I don't purport to be an expert on the DPRK, nor do I purport to be an expert on Russia. I spent a day and a half in Russia and 5 days in DPRK. So I'm just sharing with all of you my experiences. I think I am an expert, at least a Western expert, if you will, on China. But I'll tell you about China, the more I live here, the more I realize I don't understand China. So, but it's a good thing. It really, what I mean to convey by that is every 15 minutes I learn something new about China, and that is no exaggeration. So at any rate, let's get started on Vladivostok. Now, I got here by, as you saw in part 2, by the Man Gyong Bong, or the Bong boat, which is a very interesting ship with a very colorful and criminal history, frankly, which I didn't know about until I returned to China. So we went up there. It was supposed to leave on Wednesday. Generally, it's scheduled to leave Rason every Wednesday at 5 p.m. But there was some issue with the paperwork or customs that was never made clear to me or even to my friends that traveled with me. So it ended up leaving on Thursday. The problem is that my visa for Russia was only valid for 2 days, for Thursday and Friday. And as we'll see towards the end of this presentation, that led to a bit of a problem for me because I overstayed my visa by 1 day out of necessity because the ship left 1 day late. But it didn't present a problem necessarily when I arrived in Russia. I didn't take any pictures, obviously, when I first got into Russia. Well, if you watch the last episode, you see I was able to take video and pictures all the way up to where we docked and I got off the ship. But as soon as I got off the ship, we walked into the marine terminal, which went right into customs and immigration. And there, it was interesting. And I'll just share a story with you because I don't have any pictures to show. I was in customs immigration. I wasn't about ready to take my camera out. So we walk in, we go up to passport control, where normally they stamp your passport. And I do have a visa. Unlike DPRK, where one did not need a visa, you do need a visa to travel to Russia. And that was a hell of a time trying to get that visa. I got it out of the consulate in Shenyang. Not very many Americans get visas to Russia out of the Russian consulate in Shenyang, China. So it took me 3 days to get it because all the paperwork was incorrect and nobody knew what to do, and it was pretty surprising that an American even would show up there. So nonetheless, I have the passport now. I'm walking up with my two friends that were traveling with me, two Chinese gentlemen, Professor Jin from Yanbian University and Mr. Lee, who ran the travel agency that organized this tour or this trip. And they were behind me. They wanted me to go first. I wanted to go first too, in case there was a problem. They'd be right behind me. So we walk up, and I try to ease the tension because everybody could see I'm different, and they're not sure if I'm Russian or whatnot. And I pull out my American passport, and the air goes out of the room. And I just look around and I say Amerikansky, which means American, and everybody starts laughing. And it was funny, there was a drug enforcement dog in the other room, and almost every time I began speaking in English, he started barking. So we were making a joke about how the dog knew I was American and didn't like me, and blah, 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 blah. So I try to ease the tension, but apparently there was something, I think it was the fact that my visa was only good for 2 days, and I was arriving on the last day, and the passport control officer told me through a translator, there was a translator there that spoke English, that you realize you have to leave Russia today. And I was a bit upset by that, not at the consulate, or not at the passport control officer, but my friend Mr. Lee, because I had warned him about that, and he told me in a typical Chinese fashion, don't worry, no problem, for me not to worry about it. But it was already causing a problem, and I was just there in Russia, and I told him this was going to happen. So it became a problem. What happened then is somebody called the translator, and she smiled at me and said, "Follow me," and I had to go back with her into this private room, leaving my Chinese friends, one of whom spoke English, behind. I'm like, what the hell's happening? I just get out of the DPRK and go from the frying pan into the fire. So we go back into this room. I sit down there. It looks like a little schoolroom. There's nobody in there. She sits me down. She says she'll be right back, and I'm by myself. And I'm thinking, oh crap. And I'm already thinking I'm going to get arrested. There's a problem with the visa. They don't like me here. And in walks, I'd say, a 30-something-year-old, very stoic Russian passport control officer. And he doesn't speak any English, and so we have the translator, and he starts grilling me immediately. And no smile, no reaction, very concerned look on his face. He could not believe I had just come from the DPRK. He was like, well, you know that America and the DPRK do not have good relations. What were you in the DPRK for? And I told him exactly everything I've been telling all of you. I said, it's not what you think. At least that part of the DPRK, there's a casino, and I went fishing. He didn't believe I went fishing, and luckily I had my fishing pole with me. I had bought a fishing pole in the DPRK. So I reached over to show him, and he was still very, very skeptical. And I thought he was going to start asking me then about why I was coming to Russia, and I was going to say just as a tourist. But he never got around to that. Then it went right into, well, how did I get into the DPRK? And I explained that I drove in there, and he wanted to know where I drove from. And I said, from Hunchun. How'd you get to Hunchun? From Yanji. How'd you get there from Yanji? And so on and so forth. All the way back to Cleveland, Ohio. He wanted me to track how I even got into China, where I was staying in China, and he was taking all these notes. So I was starting to settle in for the long haul. I thought this is not good. He is very concerned about what the heck I'm doing here. And now I started regretting all the CIA jokes I had been making, or others been making about me. So I don't know how it happened or even how it came up, but he said or did something, or I saw a recognition in his face when I said something about living in China. And because I know there were so many Chinese tourists that go to Vladivostok, I just had a hunch that he might speak some Chinese. And sure enough, he did. And so he and I, and he's a white Russian. He's not Chinese, very European looking, and we started speaking Chinese together, and that totally floored the translator who spoke no Chinese, and she was struck by the absurdity of an American speaking to a Russian official in Chinese, and we were understanding each other, and we started laughing, and that broke the ice. And as soon as that was broken, just the fact that I could speak a little Chinese to this Russian official, he said, turned to her, and he said, I paraphrase him because I don't speak Russian, he said he can go, he's fine. And she was actually surprised by that, because she was we were going through the third degree, and I think we were only 15 minutes or 30 minutes into the third degree, and she had been prepared for the long haul too, so she was very shocked that all of a sudden he said, he can go, he's fine. And so I said, "She say ni xiao di," which is thank you, little brother, and he said, "Mei wen ti daga," no problem, big brother, which is very funny because we were very much enemies 30 seconds before we started speaking Chinese, and that was it. And I was able to get out of passport control fine. So I walk out in the hallway, and then they have Professor Jin and Mr. Lee lined up too. They were going to give them the interrogation, but I could tell it was just going to be, how the hell do you know this American, and what the hell was he doing in the DPRK, and what are you guys bringing him here for? So, but everything obviously went well. They went in, answered the questions, and they came out, and then we proceeded to tour Vladivostok. So right when I get out of the passport control, I'm in the main terminal. And by the way, I have to go to the restroom very bad. There are no Western-style toilets on the Man Gyong Bong. And so, I think maybe once in the 13 years I've been coming to China, out of sheer necessity, I used a squatting toilet, and it was not a pretty sight, and I don't like doing it, so I avoid it at all costs. And sorry for the grotesqueness about this, but at this point, I really had to go, and I really wanted to go. So I'm up there at the top, in the marine terminal, and I'm walking around looking for a restroom, and I find this, which was very funny. Notably, they don't have anything about Trump up there, although I think if they did have one with Trump involved, it would have to be tic-tac-toe or Uno or something like that, because I'm sure that guy had no idea how to play chess. So here is a picture inside the terminal. Another picture, just to kind of get a feel for it, and then here is a little video. So I'm now in Russia, in Vladivostok. I'm waiting for Jin and Lee to get out. We all got the third degree by the customs folks. So this is, typical kitsch. Trinkets, and it's 15 rubles to use the restroom, and I don't have any rubles. So many Chinese tourists coming in. Out here real quick. Hopefully I don't lose Jin and Lee. So here we are. Of course. That's cool. So you could see all the Chinese tourists and the Western-looking folks are locals. I didn't see any. I didn't see or hear any Americans, certainly while I was there. There's our ship way over there. I think, yeah. And that's the Man Gyong Bong way over here, which is next to the South Korean cruise ship. So finally, I find Professor Jin and Mr. Lee. They come out, and just another interesting little store there. Boy, if my son Max was with me, he would have gone nuts. And I wanted to buy all of these models. I was like, oh my god, this is so cool. This brought back my inner 12-year-old screaming for these. So we get to the hotel. This was the hotel we stayed at. A very deceptively nice hotel. The lobby area was elegant, and you could see here it's beautiful. And it had a really nice bar area. This was obviously unlike DPRK. A lot of restaurants like this, or hotels like this in China, by the way. So, but it was back to civilization, or so I thought, until I got to the room. Now, better than the DPRK, but unlike the DPRK, no air conditioning, and it was brutally hot. All they provided was a fan. But it's still, it was nice. It was nicer furniture than DPRK, but this was, and they had a cool TV there with many Russian channels, unlike the DPRK with 3 channels that only operated like at 8 o'clock at night. You had full Russian television, by the way, is as crazy as Mexican TV. Just so you all know, if you're familiar with that. One of the interesting things I noticed right off the bat, here's a picture of the restroom, normal restroom. Now, I forgot to post any pictures of restrooms in the DPRK or in some Chinese hotels or in my apartment in Shenyang. My apartment is like this, where you do not have a tub. The shower, basically, think of the bathroom just like this, but no tub and no shower curtain. It's basically one big room is the shower. And that's because the rooms tend to be a little bit smaller. Sometimes not. But Chinese don't do tubs for the most part, at least in the apartments. So there's there's never any tubs or shower curtains. So I thought, well, this is interesting. What's this little sticker here say? So here's the funny thing, because there's so many Chinese tourists here, that probably 90% of the tourists they get Vladivostok, and Chinese are accustomed to showers that are integrated into the bathroom itself, where there's a drain on the floor somewhere. They were having problems with the Chinese showering outside of the tub. And I spoke to Professor Jin about this, and he's like, yeah, Chinese hate showering in tubs. They find it very restrictive and odd and hard to keep the balance. And admittedly, this tub was pretty small. And also, admittedly, I hadn't taken a shower inside of a tub in the 4 months I've been here, so it was a little awkward for me too. But I just thought this was hilarious, all the flooding that was being caused. So after that, and yes, I did have a chance to go to the restroom. Actually, I went to the restroom at the marine terminal. I'd got some rubles from Mr. Lee, so I go over to the restroom area. It's a public restroom, and they have the toilet bodyguard there. This old Russian babushka, very, very mean, and didn't give a shit who I was, whether Western or anybody. I could have been Vladimir Putin, and it wouldn't have mattered to her. I told her I wanted to use the Western restroom because there was only one, and she made a big deal about it. She said it was for babies only. So I had to make up the story that I hurt my knee, and she announced to everybody that I was a big baby. But luckily, one of the other babushkas took pity on me, took my money, and let me use the Western restroom, but not before I stuck my tongue out at the babushka, who didn't see me, and made all the Chinese tourists laugh. So, so that was my comeuppance. So this is a picture outside of my window at the hotel I was staying at. And you can see, that Vladivostok, some of the infrastructure there isn't all that hot. Not third world, but, you have crumbling apartment buildings and stuff right here, and we're very close to downtown. But one thing I noticed just looking out the window kind of idly is this. Now, normal car, left-hand side, okay? Just like we do in the States. And the Russians drive on the right-hand side of the road, just like we do in the States, just like the Chinese do in China. But then I started noticing a number of these. Look, right-hand side. Huh? Right-hand side? What's a right-hand side doing? A car with the wheel on the right-hand side. And I I walked around, and I'll explain why I walked around here in a little bit. There was a problem with my visa that Mr. Lee had to work out. But anyway, so I went walking around. I'll just back up here real quick. So that visa problem, coming back to that visa problem, Mr. Lee had told me, don't worry, don't worry, don't worry. There was a problem at the, the border or at the customs control when we were coming in at the passport control. But then we got through that. Then he finds out once we get to the hotel that it is a big problem, that he's going to have to get special paperwork and essentially get me an extension on the spot. So that kind of blew our day in Vladivostok. He was going to show us around and do all this other stuff. But because, and God loved the guy and he did all this stuff, but I warned him, he can't assume. He assumed, and so once we got there, he had to scramble around. He actually he has an office there also. I was surprised he didn't know about all this stuff, but anyway, he had to scramble around and get me a one-day extension, which took him the bulk of the day until the evening, until we had dinner to get the special permission. So Jen and I just kind of made up our own tour, just went walking around aimlessly, which is probably the best thing anyway. So here you can see steering wheel on the right-hand side, steering wheel on the left-hand side. I noticed this everywhere, and what I discovered later that evening is explained by a gentleman named Dima. Dima is Mr. Lee's employee there in Vladivostok. So Friday night in Vladivostok, we're in Dima's car, driving around and look at some sights. And Dima's car is a Japanese car that many people here in Vladivostok buy. The Japanese cars, import them because they're very inexpensive, but they're made for the Japanese market, which is why Dima is driving on the wrong side.
Right side, yeah.
Yeah, it's the right side, but it's wrong. So you'll see many you see many cars here with steering wheels on the right and some on the left.
And when my friends come to Vladivostok and they often speak the right
Yeah.
right side. I see, it's my side. It's real. Why? It's Japanese car.
So apparently there is a huge aftermarket, or not aftermarket, but a huge market for used Japanese vehicles there in Vladivostok, and you can get them for as little as 3,000 renminbi, which is a few $100, like $250. This is a newer vehicle and souped up. I think he paid about 10,000 USD for it, which is obviously on the expensive side. But that's pretty much all we saw there were Japanese vehicles. I'd say 60 to 70% of the vehicles there were Japanese domestic vehicles, second-hand used vehicles that were imported through brokers into Vladivostok. It just amazes me that they allow this. So I talked and investigated some more, and the reason why the Russians allow this is apparently the domestic manufacturing market is nearly non-existent for automobiles, so they can't meet demand. And I guess there is enough of a payoff from some of these brokers or from the used Japanese car industry to allow that industry to meet the demand, because it cannot be met by the domestic market, and other imports are just too expensive for this particular market. So the only way to fill the demand is through used Japanese cars, and again, that's about all you see there, which I thought very, very interesting and telling about the economy there. So here is a picture shortly after we checked into the hotel. Jen and I just walking around. This is the main. This is the marine terminal for when ships dock, and you can't see our ship, but I think it's like somewhere over here or down here behind the trees. just right there on the other side. What you can see is the Golden Bridge, not the Golden Gate Bridge, but sure reminiscent of it, but the Golden Bridge. And I've been on the Golden Gate Bridge many times. I'd say these are almost twice as high. At least that's what they appeared to me. These towers appeared about twice as high as the towers for the Golden Gate Bridge. Just enormous. Okay, so let's move on to the next here. This is a short video of the train stop here. This is the marine terminal here, but they have this is the end of the Trans-Siberian Railroad. It actually ends here at Vladivostok. This is the Vladivostok train station, Saturday morning. At the port. The ship I came in on was not too far away. Yeah, again, this I took the next morning, Saturday morning. So as we continue to walk around, we see this guy. Yes, that is Vladimir Lenin. So I did what all the other tourists were doing, mainly Chinese tourists, and yeah, that's a stupid pose. So I made Jin do it too. Here is a supermarket, which it literally says supermarket. Actually, that's pretty much how you pronounce it. This C is pronounced like an S. This is a U. This is a P like pie. The P here is an R. So it's really supermarket, which I thought was interesting. You know, if I lived in Vladivostok, I think not only would I be able to learn Russian, because there's a lot of words in Russian I learned that are very similar to their English equivalents in terms of sound and pronunciation, but also Russian has 33 letters. They have an alphabet, unlike Chinese, which the ideograms, there's over 8,000 of them, and to be fluent, you need to know 2,000 of them. Ay, ay, ay. Here's a picture, just a weird picture of the bow of the Man Gyong Bong. I just got to keep calling it the Bong boat. Sitting there in dock. What was interesting about that is it was supposed to leave that day, the day that it dropped us off in the morning on Friday, and it was scheduled to leave back to Rasan later that day. With a bunch of Chinese and Russian tourists. And it again had some problems with its paperwork, so it was not able to leave until Saturday, and that caused a whole bunch of problems for Mr. Lee, because it was his tourists that were on there. He had arranged the Chinese and Russian tourists. Eventually the Russians were able to go, but the Chinese weren't. They were from Guangzhou, and it had something to do with making a connecting flight and something like that. But I really felt bad for Mr. Lee. So not only because he didn't prepare, he had to deal with my visa issue, which still caused me a problem, by the way, even though he got an extension. But we'll get to that later. But he had to spend the day, the first day we were there, dealing the bulk of the day dealing with my visa issue, and then the entire evening through midnight dealing with his Chinese tourists and trying to get them transportation from Vladivostok back into China, which he eventually did. But he was not a happy camper. So it kind of limited what we were able to do and see, but that's okay. This is just a picture. I was walking around. It's very European, from what I recall of Europe. Yeah, beautiful church, Russian Orthodox church, obviously. And you'll see some video of it a little bit later, but I just, when we were driving around, saw that. We were able to have an awesome dinner at this great, if you're ever in Vladivostok, this is probably the best place in the city to eat, because as you'll see, it's gorgeous inside with a beautiful view of the harbor. Well, not the Vladivostok, well, part of the Vladivostok harbor. So here's the bar, and I have to say, I don't know what it is about dirty martinis, a dirty kettle martini. I don't know why it is impossible for anybody outside of the United States to make, but it is. Dirty Kettle, just for everybody, very easy. Just chilled Kettle One vodka, no vermouth. Vermouth and vodka, yeah, I know some people think it goes good together. For me and the purists, it doesn't. All you need is the vodka chilled and just a wee bit, tiny bit of olive juice. Technically, it really should be Tom olive juice, but that's an Old South thing. So I don't expect anybody in Russia or China or Thailand to have Tom olives, but I do expect them to have olives and olive juice. And it was a pain in the ass, as it always is, wherever I go abroad, to get that simple martini made. But I was able to do it. They did have olives and they had olive juice. They did not have Kettle One, though, which I thought was a Russian vodka. Maybe it's not. But we went with Grey Goose, which is a French vodka, so go figure. Here's another picture. This is the bar here on the right. There's a beautiful view outside. This reminds me of Miami. Walking around Vladivostok. Vladivostok's very much like San Francisco. Very hilly, lots of bridges, beautiful architecture. But also Miami in the sense that the ocean vibe, very warm, waterfront, lots of beach activities and yachts, tons and tons of yachts. The oligarchs like to party in Vladivostok. So here's a little video. I'm standing at Aquarium, the restaurant, a few feet from our table. So you can see just beautiful, beautiful restaurant, beautiful area. A picture of our table. Those balloons were not for us, but what we were here for, these flowers were for Katerina. It was her birthday. She was 30-something. She is the purser or accountant for the ship, for the Man Gyong Bong boat. And here's all of us having dinner. These are all of her friends. I don't know if it's... In the U.S., we always introduce everybody to everybody, even if you don't speak English. But the Chinese never introduce... actually, that's not true. The Chinese do introduce people to me. But the Russians don't, I guess, because I never got an introduction to... These are Katerina's friends, and one of this woman, this is her son and her daughter over here. And this is Katerina and blah blah blah. I don't know who blah 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 is. Professor Jin and Mr. Lee. And just another picture of the nice restaurant there, where we had some great dirty martinis. They weren't Kettle One, but I made some awesome martinis. You all missed out on that. Another great picture. You can kind of see the Miami feel of all of this. This is another, I think this was a Sheraton or a Hyatt, another Hyatt hotel that was going up. We walked out to it. It had also stopped construction. There, as I think I mentioned in part 2, there was a lot of construction that was stopped here in Vladivostok that started about 8 years ago. And I think maybe 3 or 4 years ago, everybody ran out of money. And so there's a lot of half-built buildings throughout Vladivostok, mainly on the waterfront, and a number of them are hotels. So I don't know if it has to do with any sanctions as a result of any sanctions by the United States, or just poor investment, or what have you. But I didn't see the construction like I did the DPRK. I'll just put it that way, or in China. This was right overlooking the restaurant. These are old World War II batteries. And this is silly, but if you know me, you'll know why. I'm not even going to say it. So what I had noticed is these two standing out there just taking pictures. And I'm going to be an 8-year-old for a second, or maybe a 12-year-old. But these are two dragonflies mating, and they had been going at it for like 30 minutes. Like, my God, I gotta get a video of this. I couldn't even go that long. At least if I'm flying. So, oops. So at any rate, so whatever. Okay. So we went walking along the waterfront, the boardwalk, if you will. These were actually Hare Krishnas, like from Venice Beach. This also reminded me of Venice Beach. There was like a lot of street performers around, and I wish I would have had taken more pictures and more video, but my battery was dying at this point. They have this was like a small bay where they had a lot of the kids just out there and floating devices and little boats, and you can see this is the boardwalk here, and it goes all the way around a little beach. They had rock beaches as well as sandy beaches, and the Australians do have a surfing contest here, I think in September, which hopefully if I have a chance I'll go back to. A little square there. There's some Korean company that was putting on a really large DJ performance that we were going to go back to that night, but we couldn't because of the problem with the Bong boat trying to get the Chinese arranged, and Mr. Lee was stuck at the hotel, and we didn't feel like trying to travel around without him or Dima, and they were just too busy dealing with that. So we missed the party. But looks like it was going to be a pretty big party and lots of fun. Walking back to the hotel, I saw this. If you can see, Surf Yoga Vegan Cafe Shop. Very California. Very California. So the evening, Mr. Lee lent us Dima just to drive us around for about an hour or so. Okay, what is the name of this bridge?
Golden Bridge.
The Golden Bridge.
Golden
See,
Bridge.
it's just like
This
the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
This is
Is that much bigger?
Golden
Holy
Bay.
crap.
Golden Bay.
Golden Bay.
Golden Bay.
Wow.
Golden Bay. Yeah.
This is a huge bridge.
Golden Horn Bay, and the same name is Golden Bridge. Golden Horn Bay is under.
Oh, there's the Hyatt that's not open yet. This building there, Hyatt?
Hyatt, yes.
Yeah. That's
Hyatt
they've been working on for 8 years. Still not built.
You know.
And that, by the way, is a different hotel than the one I showed you earlier. Just another hotel that stopped construction on. Look how tall that is. By the way, if there's anything more irritating than the sound of my own voice, it is the sound of my voice trying to speak Chinese. Just personal note.
The roads are very bad. Even on the bridges.
Wow. There's a walkway. Do people walk across?
No.
No.
Here, people may walk, but on the another one bridge, which is very long, people can't.
Okay. But here, can people bicycle across?
By bicycle, yes, there are,
This
but
little
not this one.
Oh, not this one. Okay.
Not here, there.
Do you know how long this bridge is?
I don't.
2-3 kilometers?
I think smaller.
Okay, and then there's another long bridge that we went over. This gives you a good perspective of the bridge that we were just on.
Алло. Ага. Я сейчас Мишель меня отправил по делам. Нужно отвезти вот его туристов. Там смотрите, что они пришли.
You just see how tall those, I guess, trusses, I'm not sure what the term would be, but those towers, how tall they are. It's incredible. Okay, and then
Okay.
And the water.
Oh yeah, yeah. So this is under the bridge. This is where all the local yuppies, I guess, hang out. 20s and 30 somethings.
this is the Golden Bridge up here that we had just gone across. And I should say hipsters, not yuppies.
We're trying to find parking. This reminds me of Balboa in the States.
And so this is the Hyatt Hotel, or the shell of the Hyatt Hotel. So it's funny, they at least light it up, even though it's a carcass. So we're gonna, Dima told us, or asked, would you like to go see this hangout that everybody comes to on a Friday night? And what they do, it's, again, a bunch of hipsters, 20, 30-somethings. They hang out and they smoke hookahs, the big hookah, or the shishas, as sometimes they're called, or argilis, or nargilis. I can't remember the pronunciation, but you'll see what I mean.
So this is the Golden Bridge. This is Golden Bridge. Okay, and this is Golden Bay.
Golden Horn Bay. Golden Horn.
Golden Horn Bay. Okay.
And so here's some. You could see, it's, I know it's dark, but pretty much all the cars lined up through here, and there are hundreds of them. They all have the hipsters hanging out of the back, smoking these hookahs. And then a little boardwalk here, skating and walking along.
Shisha, just hanging out here. You mean by my shisha?
Shisha.
Shisha.
What do you mean shisha?
Yes. I don't know how to explain shisha in Chinese. It's just like, look. So we're walking around, and right behind us is this wall, and on the other side of the wall is another little boardwalk. I'm not sure what the wall was there for, what purpose it served. But the little boardwalk there is basically a big, long dock. And these guys were having a party, heard me speaking English, and came over to, talk and chit-chat. The first thing they said is no pictures, no pictures. And then all of a sudden they say, oh, let's take a picture. And then something very weird happened.
Хотите, а мы своей энергией поможем тому, чтобы оно сдулось.
You can wash these clothes and you'll.
If you get lucky and you can wish all your all your wishes can come true if you do this right now, because it's a unique chance for you to make it. Yeah, just do it like this. Yeah.
I don't know what the hell is going on. These girls, and there was another group of them, going up to strangers, having them wash panties in there. And I wasn't going to, I don't know what the hell was going on, but I thought I'd whip the camera out. I was getting prepared to be mugged, frankly.
Okay, Richard, your turn.
It's fun. It's fun.
Make a wish. It will come true.
Go ahead.
It's a crazy Russian tradition.
Yeah, definitely a crazy Russian tradition. So he was getting too enthusiastic here.
All the visions coming true right now.
Yeah, so Dima's like, let's go. He's getting nervous too.
That's enough. Okay, enough wishing. No, thank you. That's okay. All my wishes already came true.
Lots of things. I'm absolutely sure.
Okay, let's go. We got Zona. Okay, bye-bye.
So very, very odd. I asked Dima what the hell had just happened and what was this all about. Some prank or something like that. I saw, like I said, another group going around doing the same thing to people, and he didn't know. He said that was the first time he'd ever seen anything like that. So for all I know, we're now on some candid camera for Vladivostok TV or something like that. And yes, those were panties. So after that absurdity, we just went driving around and taking pictures of statues and what have you. It was getting pretty late. This is now about, I'd say, 1 o'clock in the morning. Jin had gone to bed. Dima had to go back to the hotel and was working with Mr. Lee on figuring out how to get the Chinese back into China. So, and I was hungry. So everything was closed. This isn't New York where everything's open 24 hours a day, except for this place. This is right by, if you ever visit Vladivostok and you come in by ship, right in the front of the marine terminal is the Grid, which is a waffle and grill house, which, by the way, I don't recall ever seeing any. I know Waffle House in the United States, but a place that makes waffles that's not Waffle House, like waffles, high-end waffles are a thing. There's Waffle Houses, not like the Waffle Houses you're thinking of, not the not the white trash places in the States, but really high-end Belgian waffle kind of stuff all over Northeast China. And with ice cream and coffee and all this stuff. And it's a thing. And it strikes me as very unusual, almost ad hoc. But it's a thing in Russia too, apparently. People love waffles. I mean, people love waffles in the States too, and I'm talking way too much about waffles. So anyway, I went here to have a late night dinner, and I had the French hot dog, which I had no idea even existed, and it was pretty good, at 100 rubles. So 100 rubles, it's about 60 rubles to the dollar, so that's like $1.40 or something like that. So anyway, that was pretty good. So walked around a little bit that evening, tried to be artistic. Yeah, the moon was out, looked pretty cool. So got this picture. That is the marine terminal there with the moon right above it. Went back out just to look at our ship, and of course it was still there. It should have been left hours again before, but there was some problem with customs again. So again, as you'll remember from the second video, it was ironic that we docked, and here we are, and we're ass end in, or a stern dock, next to this ship from South Korea. So there's North Korea and South Korea right there in Russia. And no fights. Nobody got in a fight, which was very disappointing. It was my money, frankly, would have been on the North Koreans. Another picture trying to be artistic, the Golden Bridge. This is the Golden Horn Bay right there in Vladivostok. This is a military ship over here, and I thought it looked pretty cool just standing out there. It's maybe around 3 o'clock, 2:30 in the morning now. I can't sleep. I'm just too excited, and also, frankly, a little disappointed that I didn't get to see more because of all the shenanigans that had happened. But this new day was going to more than make up for it, as you'll see in a little bit. Some old Soviet-era architecture, and I guess this is what you would call a relief. Went walking around. I went back to the hotel, took a nap, and then came back out about, say, 5:30 in the morning once the sun came up. By the way, Russia is 2 hours, this part of Russia is 2 hours ahead of China. China doesn't have any time zones, so it's one big time zone. But right when you go from China into Russia, you bump ahead 2 hours. So as you recall, DPRK is 30 minutes ahead of China. So when I went due north from DPRK to Vladivostok, then I jumped ahead another hour and a half. And when I came back into China from Russia, I lost 2 hours, or gained 2 hours, or whatever. But it was a 2-hour difference. So I can't follow me. If you can follow me, it's good for you. Okay, so walking around, I think this is I don't even know what this is. Bank, an ATM or something, but I just thought that was a pretty cool logo. And you'll see there's another cool bank logo that I found, very creative. This, some famous statue, and they were setting up for a farmer's market that morning. I wish I had more time and would have ventured around and bought some things. But you can see they have all the fresh fruits and vegetables and honey even. Really cool stuff. Huge shrimp. Fresh fish. Just, I mean, next time I go to Vladivostok, I'm definitely going to go down to the farmer's market and buy a bunch of crap and just go back and cook somewhere. I don't know where. I'll have to find a place. Statue in Russian. Here's a little video.
So this appears to be a church, Russian Orthodox church under construction. There is the temporary facility, and it is about 7 a.m. Saturday morning, July 15. And this is the monument to the city of military glory. And I have not studied my history, so I'm not sure what major battles occurred here.
Okay, and so looking around the base, around the corners of the statue, there were some cool little reliefs. Very czar looking. And then one of the main streets there in Vladivostok, again, reminds me very much, I could see a trolley car like from San Francisco coming up the street. Always find it interesting and neat to see American movies in foreign countries, the way they're, at least the foreign writing on them. Although I don't know what movie this is. That's kind of a freaky looking poster. I don't know if that's an American movie or a local, but whatever it is, I want to see that movie. I also want to see the new Planet of the Apes one. Spider-Man. And this looks like a chick flick. Okay. So I don't know what that says, but it looks really cool. Oh, it says Gum Old Courtyard. It's a weird name. I just realized that. A random statue of a sailor there on the street. Obviously, it's a sailing town and a big naval presence there. Interesting. I think this was a jewelry shop, and because there's so many Chinese that go there, although this looks like traditional Chinese to me as opposed to simplified. This is more like what you would see in Hong Kong or Taiwan. And there's Russian there. I guess that's fashion. Doesn't look like it matches, but okay. And then just a lot of artsy looking posters and advertisements all over, at least this part of Vladivostok. I was in the merchant district. I'm told this was a jewelry store, or is a jewelry store also, with the Chinese. And I'm surprised there's no Korean, though. But just Russian and Chinese. This looks like there is going to be a big festival. Either there was one or one coming up. A bunch of bands, I think. DJ Code. That's what I assume. A cool sign. And stupidity.
So
There was English graffiti, which I thought was odd or interesting. And why is this stupid? Because this is a perfect place for an American to get mugged at any time of day.
Takes me over to the church. Probably not the safest place in the evening. And actually, I have not seen graffiti in a long time. Say what you will about the Russians, they know how to build churches. Wow. This is very impressive. And no, I don't know the name.
So here's another, probably a better picture of the church. So and this is going to sound silly. I don't know how the heck they keep the tops of these onion domes so clean. I mean, they sparkle. They are so shiny, and this picture doesn't do it justice, primarily because it was overcast at that time. But I would think they would be filled with bird crap. Lots of seagulls. This is an ocean port, and it's kind of hard to see, but on all these little steps up here on these ledges, there are a bunch of needles to keep the pigeons and the seagulls off. But there is nothing on those on the tops of these, and I don't know how they treat them. And I'm curious if any of you know any metallurgists out there. How do they keep the poop off, and how do they keep the things from not rusting and looking decrepit? Because they look beautiful from all angles. Some magic. Maybe it's Russian Orthodox magic. I don't want to make any jokes like, this is for the holy dog or anything like that, so I won't. But I saw this sitting out there, and I'm not sure what it's for. One of the czars, I think, this church is dedicated to him, if I understood, which I probably didn't. Half completed, but doesn't look like it's been under construction for a while, and a new smaller church off to this behind this church. And then I saw this guy sitting there, his beautiful little chapel, I guess is what you would call it. And I walked over to take a peek inside. This is the front of it. I don't read Russian, so for any of you that do, it looks like it may have been dedicated in 1998. And again, the tops are beautiful. Here, keep that up. Took a picture inside real quickly. There was a young woman in there that was cleaning up, and I didn't want to get yelled at, so I just took it really quick. So unfortunately, that's why it's a little blurry, but it looks like they're cleaning windows and what have you inside this little chapel. But it doesn't look like it's really in use because there's no seating. But maybe that's the thing. And then this is a picture of a picture. There was a poster outside. You can kind of see the lines of it here, of what this looks like lit up in the winter. And it's just gorgeous. I'm walking back down. Basically, this chapel sits on top of a hill overlooking Vladivostok. So walking back down the hill, I saw more remnants of the Soviet era. Soviet apartment 15 or 50. And saw this hipster place, which I wish had it been open. I'm badly in need of a haircut right now and a beard trim. And nobody knows how to trim a beard in China. So I was like, oh God, this would have been perfect because I could have got my beard trimmed and my hair cut. But, Russians are like Chinese. They open late. I have no idea what this building was. It looks maybe an official government building because of the colors down here, but I thought that looked pretty cool. It's probably the Gulag. And then another really awesome logo I saw, and this, interestingly enough, is a logo for a local bank. This is a bank. At least it looked like a bank to me. And then speaking of interesting things, I posted this on Facebook too. This very disturbing. These griffins with boobs. I vaguely remember reading something about this a long time ago in college for some art class. There's a reason for these, but it escapes me now, and I'm too lazy to look it up on Google. But for any of you that know why there's boobs on the griffins, please let me know. And saw this scary looking gargoyle. It reminds me of an angry Plato for some reason. So that kind of ended the tour of Vladivostok, and now here's where the really scary stuff starts coming in. My trip out of Vladivostok. So we took the ship in from DPRK up to Vladivostok, but to get out of Russia, now we weren't going to take the ship back. We had to drive out of Vladivostok, and just to get to the border between Russia and China is a 4-hour drive, and it is a drive on crappy roads.
Russian driving.
This Dima driving.
This is like those videos on YouTube. Watch the Russian drivers drive like crazy like this, right?
And yes, for those of you who speak Chinese, Mr. Lee is making a dirty joke right now. And I'm not going to repeat it because it's pretty dirty, but they taught it to me.
What? I can't hear
So Dima's moving along at a nice clip right here, and this road is very bumpy. I think most of us in the States would probably go along at about 35 miles an hour, but because we had a 4-hour drive to the border, because Vladivostok is on a long peninsula, and I regret that I didn't use pictures of the satellite images, but any of you can easily go on Google and see. See, Vladivostok is on a large peninsula, so you got to drive north up along the peninsula, back around to the left or to the west, and then come back down the other side for a few hundred miles. And then I think it was a total of 300 kilometers from Vladivostok to the border on a really shitty road.
Well, this will be interesting to see how we pass this course.
I mean, there were parts right there we actually got a little air. This guy is driving so fast in this in this little Japanese vehicle. It was, and I told him before, he wasn't aware of this. I was made aware of it by my son Max. Apparently on YouTube it's very popular to watch all these car wrecks in Russia, because Russians always drive with these little video cameras at the front of their car. And I've been told a variety of things why. It's either to, for accidents in case something happens to prove that they're not at fault, or because there's a lot of corruption and it's a deterrent to cops trying to shake people down. But at any rate, because they all have cameras, they all record all these crazy ass accidents. But driving like this, I could see why. I was expecting that we would become another YouTube video.
Okay, Dima, use the Force. Luke Skywalker. Uh-oh, stuck. Obi-Wan Kenobi, there we go, man. Use the Force, Luke.
So, by the way, this cool little medal here is for an ice run. Apparently, in the winter, when the harbor freezes over, they actually have, I don't know if they're full-on marathons, but like 5Ks and 10Ks where they run on the ice with spikes. Russians. So this is where it starts to get a little hairy.
Russian driving.
Getting more air.
Videos on YouTube.
Oh, I think that's the same video. Sorry about that. Let me get to this one. Okay, so we get up to a bus, and there's a problem trying to get around him. You'll see. You can see the bus driving all over the place.
Washouts.
And that bus doesn't care if there's other oncoming traffic.
Adventure travel.
But so very, very bumpy. So ultimately, we're not able to get around him. We're like behind him for an hour. And finally, we get to this. Now, there's a lot of stuff that's going to happen now that I was totally unaware of.
Now, what are all these tractor trailers doing here?
Trailers with some cargo to China.
Yes, but why are they all parked along the side?
Because there is no parking lot.
Oh,
They wait to go across the board.
they wait for what? I'm sorry?
To across the board.
Oh, wow.
So I start seeing all these hundreds of trucks just lined up along the side, all parked there, some just empty trailers. And so Dima's telling me, I asked Dima, why are they there? And I don't know if you heard him, but he says, because there's no parking lot. And so I'm starting to think, that doesn't really make any sense to me. Why aren't they just going through? You know, it's a border like anywhere else, you know, like crossing from Mexico back into the States. Why are they parked here?
Cross the border?
Yes.
Oh.
Boy, some of them must be waiting a long time.
This container can...
So with this, we go on for a few miles like this. And then
Oh, here's the border. That's the border. Oh my God, that's it? That's the border?
So we can get out, okay?
okay, so by the way, right before we get there, we also start seeing a whole bunch of passenger buses from Yanji parked along the side of the road too. I'm very confused about what's going on at this point. So there you can see the border crossing. What I'm told is the border crossing. So I get out and I talk to Dima.
Okay, so we're at the border with China right here.
It's not China. It's a neutral zone.
A neutral zone.
Territory. Yeah.
Okay, but this is the end of Russia.
End of Russia. Yeah.
So why are we waiting? All this, what are we waiting for?
Wait for free seats in the buses.
This is the first time I'm being told anything about a bus. I thought Dima was going to drive us right up to the border. We get out, just like we did when we went into the DPRK. We had a driver drive us right up to the Chinese immigration building. We walk in, clear customs there, go to the other side, take a bus like a quarter mile over to the DPRK side, and then check in through there, and then hop out onto another vehicle and go into Rasan. So I thought it was going to be easy like that. No.
Oh, those big red buses that we saw? We have to get on them?
Yeah.
So when do they cross?
And cross on by bus.
Yeah, but when?
Well, I don't know when. I don't know what was the first will go. On the first who have a seat, free seats, who will go.
Interesting.
No,
Okay. Okay.
So when I say interesting, I am meaning what the F in my head. So full of surprises it's going to turn out. So Mr. Lee wanders around and bribes one of the buses to let us on board, and there are no seats left, of course.
So we are now on the bus with many Russians, no Chinese. Maybe Indian, Zhongguoren. We go across the border.
Okay, now we're still, you could see here, still there's the purported border shack or guard shack, and we're on this bus and we're just sitting there waiting and waiting and waiting. Luckily, I didn't have to go to the restroom because there is nothing around here. There is nothing. It was just, excuse me, we're driving for 4 hours through wilderness, and then all of a sudden we're here at this thing. And that's it. There was one stop along the way, but that was like 2 hours behind us. But there's nothing here. No stands, no porta potties, nada. Just a couple of guys with guns. That was it.
Finally, after 1 hour and 7 or 8 minutes. Now we're at border. Hopefully knows what he's doing. Oh yeah. Yeah, it looks like from World War II. A long time ago, old bunker. Yeah.
And what Jen pointed out is that there's an old World War II bunker here with guns pointing out of it or something like that. So at this point, I'm like, okay, we're moving along. Things are going along well. Well, a border guard gets on board. He goes through all of our passports and checking everything. And I was getting ready to get pulled off. I thought I was going to get pulled off. There'd be a problem. But no, he looks at me and everything's fine. All the gloomy Russians are just checking me up and down the whole time. So I'm not having good vibes, and I'm just waiting to get through. So I'm thinking now, we're going to drive up to to maybe a few hundred more yards, and we're going to be at the Russian immigration center or the actual border where they're going to stamp passports and all that stuff. But no, we end up at yet another checkpoint. You can see I took a quick picture of it here.
Why they have two borders?
I don't know. This is another checkpoint.
Double check?
Double check.
Assurance.
Yeah.
Assurance.
Quality assurance, yes. See, Russian also, not China. See, all that was not neutral territory. That was China, or Russia.
So it took us about another 20 minutes of driving to get to this second checkpoint. And a border guard came on again and checked all of our passports. So it was very arduous to get through here. And everybody was very quiet. Nobody was complaining. So I could tell these, I was the only one like spinning my head around, like what's going on the whole time. So I think a lot of these Russians had been through this before, so they knew the drill, but I didn't, and I'd been given wrong information. I was told, "Oh, you're in neutral territory," but no, I was still in Russia. So we go through this second checkpoint, and then maybe another mile we drive to an old, dilapidated tin building, a very large tin building, where they park the bus inside of the building and we all hop off. And then I figured, okay, now we're finally at the Russian checkpoint to get our passport stamped, and we were. So we get in line, and we're with all the Russians. They go through, they're going through, and I go through. I again ask that I go first before Lee and Kim go, and I walk up to the board. By this time, by the way, I have a bunch of paperwork. Lee had spent the day prior getting a bunch of paperwork to approve a visa extension so I could stay this extra day. So I have all my paperwork in order, and it's like 10 sheets of paper and my passport. And so I'm ready to go, and I walk up and I do the whole Amerikansky drill again, and everybody laughs. It's funny because they had another border guard there who came over to me, and she didn't speak fluent English, but enough where we can converse. And she said they had never seen an American. She had heard of Americans coming through this checkpoint before, but she had never seen one. So she was very interested looking at my passport and all this other stuff. So I do the Amerikansky thing, everybody laughs, and then of course problem with my visa. And I call Lee over, and he starts explaining to her in Russian, look, he has all his paperwork, everything's in order, blah, 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 blah. And she says, well, this is above my pay grade. We're going to have somebody else higher up take a look at you. I'm like, great. So we get out of line, and Jin, Lee, and I are just waiting for the boss to show up. As we're waiting for about maybe 15, 20 minutes, and then another passport control officer comes out and tells Lee and Jin, you guys have to go through. You can't stay here waiting with Mark. So they go through, and now I'm by myself again. And folks, I got to tell you, that's not a good feeling when you're in a foreign country that's not friendly, and you do not have anybody that is fluent in your language close to you to explain what the heck is going on. And I knew Lee was just on a hope and prayer because he'd already screwed up a few times, so now it's just kind of a hope and prayer that I'm going to get through without any problems. So I'm standing there for maybe another 20 minutes waiting for the boss to come, and I keep asking the guard that's with me, who's running up and down and trying to process the rest of the Russians through, is there a problem? And she says, I don't know, which is the worst thing to hear because that screams, oh, there's a problem. And I'm thinking, well, I know there's a consulate back in Vladivostok, but I don't have a phone with me because I didn't bring any phones or a laptop with me because we'd gone through DPRK and I didn't want anything to get confiscated. So I'll have to figure out how to hop on a bus to get back to the consulate and figure out how to get back in China. I just don't know what's going to happen here because obviously I overstayed my visa, and I'm sure the paperwork isn't working out. That's why the big boss has to show up. So I have all these nightmare scenarios in my head, and then, of course, it gets worse. The boss shows up, and he says, come with me. So I have to walk upstairs into another room where there's one, I guess she's a guard, playing on a computer. Very nice, very friendly, 20-something. Just looks at me, kind of gives me a quizzical look, and looks at the guard with a quizzical look, and he gives her a quizzical look back. And I see a very nervous Chinese guy sweating, and Chinese don't sweat. So this guy, there's a Chinese tourist there, and he has a bunch of bags with him, and he's sitting in this room sweating and looking at me really nervous. And I figure, well, this guy hopefully knows something, so I start talking to him a little bit, and he doesn't know whether it's okay to talk to me and stuff. And as soon as we start talking, I'm just like saying, hello, where are you from? What's going on? A guard comes in and takes him right out. I'm like, shit, I just got him in trouble, or I got myself more trouble. So I'm sitting there now by myself with one guard in this really hot room inside this tin-roofed building, and she doesn't speak any English, so she can't even tell me what the heck's going on. I had a can of coffee with me. I'm just getting really nervous, so I just start drinking this coffee. If I had cigarettes with me, I would have been smoking cigarettes like crazy. Because here's the end. This is how it's gonna. Here's my, this is how I'm gonna get on the news, and all of you are gonna read about me on CNN because I overstayed my visa by one day. And so doom and gloom is now setting in. I'm getting ready for the long haul. I'm just wondering if they have Western style toilets. That was my big worry at the moment. How am I going to get out of here, and can I take a shit in a regular spot soon? And nobody's telling me anything. So I am I'm resigned to my fate at this point. And, Mark, you should have known this was going to happen. This was not a good idea. You should have insisted on this, that, and the other. And why didn't Lee tell you to get a longer visa? Probably possible to get a longer visa, and just nobody told you what to do. And da-da-da-da-da-da-da. This is the last time I'm ever going to do shit like this. So right when I give up all hope, in walks another boss. And he says, "Get up." And I'm getting ready to get another interrogation. He has me follow him outside. We stop at another office where there's a bunch of other officers in there. And okay, fine. I can handle this. Let's go in. You guys chat me up. Let's see what happens. I'm getting all ready to be interrogated. He says something to them. They wave him off. He takes me back downstairs, throws my passport and paper at the passport control officer. So I'm thinking, okay, everything's going to be cool. It takes her about 5 minutes, and she's looking at her computer monitor, and then looking at me, and then looking down at the passport, and then at her monitor, and I'm like, oh God, come on. I mean, just all this tension. Well, just tell me if I'm in trouble or not. And then finally, after 5 minutes of this, looking back and forth, up and down, and a bunch of other officers start coming in and talking and stuff, and finally they say, okay, you can go. Stamp, stamp. Boom, bye. They stamp my passport. Oh, thank you, Jesus. So now I get on to the I get onto the bus, and I didn't realize that all the Russians had been waiting for me. I had to stay on the same bus. So all the Russians had long passed through customs control or passport control. And they're sitting on the bus waiting for me. And I'm like, oh shit, I don't know how to say sorry, but it's not my fault. I felt like pointing at Lee. Blame him. He's the one that screwed up. So I get on board, and there was angry Russians. A busload of angry Russians looking at me. And I frankly could care less. I made it out. I didn't get arrested. And I'm in the home stretch back to China. So we get on the bus, and we drive maybe, I think it was around another mile. But my mind was so discombobulated at that point, I really wasn't paying attention. So we get to the border at China. We get off the bus, and everything is fine. I get through China, and it's like I felt like I was at home. Oh, thank God, I'm back in China. Everything's cool. There was a slight delay at the Chinese border processing me through because they had never seen an American passport. None of them had ever seen an American passport before, so they were just real, curious about it. So. At any rate, get through there, no problems, get to the other side, and I just want a beer. Actually, I want baijiu. I want something strong, but a beer will do. So we get to the other side. No one tells me or Jin, or Lee is the one that should have told us. No one tells us the same bus that we had been on is our transportation back to Hunchun. So go on the bus, stay on the bus. It's going to continue. I had assumed, and not completely wrongly, that Lee was going to have a car pick us up there at the border because that's how it worked in the past. A car or a taxi or something like that would pick us up and then take us back to Hunchun, which wasn't that far away. So I tell Lee, hey, Jen and I, we're going to go grab some souvenirs and go grab a beer or something before we hop on the bus, or before we hop in your car. Again, we didn't know we were supposed to hop on the bus. Lee said nothing to us. We just get out there, and I'm just assuming that there's going to be a car and that Lee is waiting for a car to pick us up. So we go over to, and by the way, here's the border. This is on the China side. This is where all the buses are now to pick people up and take them back to Hunchun. Excuse me, this is the border crossing. This is where we came out of. These are people coming out. So we walk over to here, a bunch of stores to, look, buy souvenirs and get a beer. So we're not over there 5 minutes. We come back out looking for Lee. Where's Lee? No Lee. We were walking up and down for about 45 minutes looking for this guy. Nothing. So finally, we hire a guy for 14, 15 bucks, about 100 renminbi, to drive us back into Hunchun, to drive us to Lee's office, where we find out, and here's Lee's office in Hunchun, where we find out that, and I'm still pissed at Lee about this, the guy isn't the brightest, but I guess I understand. He said as soon as he got on the bus, the Russians were pissed at me because I wasn't on the bus yet, and I had already caused too much of a delay. So they said, screw the American, we're leaving, bye. And frankly, I think Lee should have stayed to let us know, but he just went on the bus. And according to Lee, is that he knows how adventurous I am and how I can figure shit out. So he figured I would just show up, even though I had no phone, no laptop, no means of communication, that I would just show up at his office, and the asshole was right. So we eventually get back here to his office. I couldn't even yell and scream. I was just so happy to be out of that big adventure. So at the end of my 4 days, it was I had a hell of a time. It was, I wouldn't say fun, but it was fascinating. I did have fun, frankly, in DPRK, and I love learning about the countries and the travel and all the history, the recent history that between the two countries, and certainly about the Bong boat. At least I learned later that day about the Bong boat, about what its particular history involved in the human kidnapping and drug trafficking and all that other stuff that I cover in part 2. But it was again fascinating. I learned a lot about our enemies. I mean, not nearly enough to be an expert, but enough to make it intriguing that these, Russia, like China, like DPRK, and like America, isn't one-dimensional. You can't visit St. Louis for a week and think you know everything about there is to know about Americans. So, I mean, I would be naive to say that I know everything there is about DPRK just by spending 5 days in Rasan, or that I know anything about Russia spending a day and a half in Vladivostok. I mean, you would need years just to learn about a particular city. But with that said, I can tell you that these are not homogenous countries. These are not countries that are just one big enemy, all hell-bent on our destruction or our demise. I get the feeling that both of them need us. That both DPRK, at least in the Rasan region, and in Vladivostok, need Americans. And by what I don't mean we need to come in to be the big rescuers or anything like that, but they need to be understood. We need to interact with them. That's a much better way for diplomacy and to develop relationships between our countries, rather than one of isolation and cutting them off and fostering rumor and innuendo and speculation and falsehood between the two countries. That's what I firmly believe. And I've experienced, and I speak from experience in that regard with respect to China. Coming to China now for 13 years, I can tell you it is still nothing like what we experience in the media in the West. China is very different, and I'm not going to go into China. That's years of discussion, but certainly with DPRK or I should say with Rasan and Vladivostok, they're not what I expected. Completely different from what the West makes them out to be, and frankly, even what China makes them out to be. I was told before I went into Vladivostok by Chinese, as you heard in one of the videos I played, that Vladivostok was a backwater town. There wasn't much to it, just a couple of casinos and a couple of hotels and nothing to do, and very small and rural. It was anything but that. As you saw, it's San Francisco on the it's San Francisco and Miami in old world Europe altogether. So it was a fascinating country, and I purposefully didn't do any type of investigation into Vladivostok before I went, because I just wanted to experience it fresh, rather than to be biased in some way about what to expect. So it was very refreshing when when we were coming into port. First thing that struck me is, my God, this is San Francisco. And the funny thing was, when I got into the hotel and I was flipping through one of their English language brochures, it said city of Vladivostok often is compared to San Francisco and Naples. And I've never been to Naples, but I've been to San Francisco many times. It's like, my God, yeah, I see that. And I wasn't expecting that. As a matter of fact, I was expecting something completely opposite. So, at the end of the day, these enemies are more windmills than they are enemies. I'm not an apologist for either Russia, or I should say Russian policy or foreign policy towards the United States. Frankly, I really don't even know what it is towards the United States. I have a feeling of what the DPRK policy is, or at least from the Kim regime, and I'm certainly not an apologist or a defender of it. And I do believe that the Kim regime does need to change. But with all of that said, it's not as evil or as uniformly evil as one might expect. If you visit the DPRK, it's going to be very, very different than what it's portrayed again in the West, and I can't emphasize that enough. And the same thing with Russia. So if you ever want to go on the Great Enemies tour with me, just let me know. It's a very enlightening experience, but of course, like anything, it's not for everybody. You have to have a very high tolerance for adversity. You're going to have a very high tolerance for going with the flow and adapting, as you can see, because there's going to be a lot of unknowns along the trip, and you might be on your own for a little bit too, even traveling with locals. I have to say though, if you're not traveling with Chinese, that's very risky. Travel with Chinese, travel with people who have been there before. That's going to be your best ticket out of any problems that you might encounter. Because ultimately, even though I did encounter problems, they were solved. I wasn't enlightened fully ahead of time, probably on purpose, because I think Lee was going on a hope and a prayer that everything would work out, but they tend to. So I've rambled on enough. I hope you've enjoyed my 3 videos for this presentation for this trip, as well as the prior trip. And again, I welcome any questions or concerns or comments. You can post them there on YouTube, or just email them to me directly. And thank you again very much.